My name is Ronald Campbell, and I am 82 years old. I've lived in Brighton since I was born, and I can say I know every corner of the St. Augustine neighborhood, like one knows the wrinkles in their own mirror. This city grew with me, aged with me, changed its clothes many times, while I insisted on always wearing the same dark suit. Brighton still pulses, still laughs, still has people chatting idly on the sidewalks at dusk. I, internally, grew quieter and quieter. Every day I sit in this wicker chair that Vera bought at a craft fair in New Haven years ago. It's the only piece in the house that still holds her scent, or at least that's what my imagination insists on convincing me. Every morning, when I settle here with the poorly made coffee I brew, I feel like she's still around. But she's not. And this emptiness, which took me so long to recognize, was my own doing. Built slowly, brick by brick, over almost 5 decades of voluntary silence. I was born in 1942, son of Joseph Campbell and Mrs. Nancy, rural migrants who came from the interior of the Green Mountains, with calloused hands and hearts hardened by life's blows. My father was a man of few words and great seriousness. I never saw him embrace my mother in front of us children. Their love existed in a language that took me years to try and decipher. The guaranteed plate of food, the mended blanket in winter, the yard swept every week without fail. I learned early that feelings aren't spoken, they're shown. And they're shown in silence, with head down and hands busy. I met Vera at a summer fair at the local high school in the neighborhood in June 1963. She was 18, wore a sunflower print calico dress, and had the most genuine laugh I had ever heard in my life. She laughed with her whole body, throwing her head back without worrying about what anyone around her thought. I stood still on the other side of the courtyard, decorated with flags, holding a glass of spiced cider I couldn't drink, just looking at her. My friend Harry elbowed me. "Close your mouth, Ronald. You look like a fish out of water." And I closed my mouth. But my heart remained open that night, never to properly close again. We married in March 1965, in a simple ceremony at St. Joseph's Church, with a gerbera bouquet and cornmeal cake at the reception. Her family, the Fosters, were more expressive than mine. Vera's father, Mr. Gerald, cried during the wedding march and wasn't ashamed of it at all. I observed that with a certain discomfort, thinking it was an exaggeration for a grown man. Today I understand that he simply knew something I would need decades to learn. That repressed feeling doesn't disappear. It rots from within. I got a job at a construction company as a building technician right after the wedding. I worked hard, honestly, without missing a single day. In less than 10 years, I was already a site supervisor, proud of my journey. Vera took care of the apartment in the Downs, raising our son Mark and our daughter Clara with a tenderness I admired from afar. Like one admires a painting in a gallery they don't feel worthy of touching. She sang while she cooked. She sang Aretha Franklin, Joni Mitchell, sometimes folk rock tunes, with a voice slightly off-key, but full of a soul that filled every room in the house. I listened from the living room, with a newspaper on my lap, and felt that tightness in my chest that today I know how to call by the right name. Love overflowing with nowhere to go. But I never went down to the kitchen to tell her. The years pass with a speed that we only understand when they are already gone. Ma grew up, went to study engineering at the State University of Brighton, married Patricia, had children. Clara graduated in education, went to work in a public school, and was always the daughter who asked how I really was, not just out of habit. I always replied, "I'm fine, daughter, no need to worry." And I believed it with all the sincerity of someone who still hadn't learned that being well and feeling alive are completely different things. Vera aged with a grace that disconcerted me. White hairs first appeared at her temples, then took over everything. She let it happen, without drama, without lamentation. I thought it was beautiful, but I never said so. She swapped the calico dress for a knitted tracksuit and leather slippers, and continued to be the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my entire life. But I guarded this like a treasure in a safe, for which I myself had lost the key. I remember a Sunday afternoon in August 1997. The family was gathered in the apartment. The grandchildren ran down the hallway, Mark discussed politics with Clara, and Vera was on the balcony tending to her ferns. I stood on the doorstep looking at her. The light of that winter afternoon hit her face sideways, and she was smiling at the plants with the same tenderness she dedicated to everything she loved. I thought with a clarity that surprised me, I need to go over there and tell her that she is the most important thing that has ever happened in my life. I needed to say that. I stood still. Mark called me to watch the game on television, and I went. That moment hung in my memory like a painting I never finished nailing to the wall. The turning point that would change everything happened on a rainy Wednesday in May 2003. It was night. The children already had their own homes. We sat at the table for dinner, as usual, the sound of rain hitting the window, covering the silence we no longer even noticed. So accustomed we were. Vera placed the plate in front of me. Rice, beans, and roast chicken, just the way I like it, with rosemary and garlic. Then she sat down, looked at me for a long time, with calm eyes, and said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "Ronald, have you ever wondered if I am happy?" The fork remained suspended in the air. I stared at her. She wasn't angry. There were no tears. It was just that question, clean and honest, hovering over the table between the hot sauce and the bottle of mineral water. I felt my heart beat faster. I felt that those words were the summary of almost 40 years of unspoken things between us. A silent inventory of absences that I had allowed to accumulate like dust on a piece of furniture no one touches anymore. And what did I do? I cleared my throat, looked at my plate and said, "You have what you need, Vera. You've never lacked anything." She nodded slowly, with a smile that wasn't a smile. She finished dinner without saying anything else, washed the dishes carefully, and went to watch television. And I remained seated at the table with my food going cold in front of me, with the uncomfortable feeling that I had failed an important test without even understanding what the question was. The rain continued outside. The house was silent, and inside me something I still couldn't name had begun to crack. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. That night in 2003, I lay down and stared at the ceiling for hours. The fan spun slowly in the dark. Vera slept beside me with that serene breathing she always had, as if the world were a fair place and she knew it. I didn't sleep. I kept replaying her question in my head, trying to convince myself that I had answered correctly, that provider and companion were the same thing, that love without words was still complete love. I managed to convince myself, at least that night. The following years were outwardly tranquil. I retired in 2005 after almost 40 years at the construction company. Vera still gave embroidery lessons to the neighbors in the living room on Tuesdays, laughed a lot, entertained well. I moved around the house like a planet in stable orbit, present, predictable, but distant enough never to generate warmth. Sometimes on weekends we would go to the market together. She chose fruits with an attention I never understood. She smelled the mangoes, gently squeezed the passion fruits, chatted with the stall vendor as if they were old acquaintances. I stayed 2 steps behind, waiting, without asking what she was thinking. In 2009, our daughter Clara came to visit me one Saturday afternoon, alone, without warning. She sat in front of me on the balcony, accepted the coffee, and remained quiet for a moment before speaking. She said that her mother was fine, but that sometimes she seemed to be holding a lot in. She said it carefully, without accusing, in her own way. I replied that Vera had always been like that, reserved. Clara looked at me with those eyes of hers that always saw deeper than I liked. "Dad, she's not reserved, she's lonely, and there's a difference." Did I take that seriously? No. I thanked her for the imaginary coffee, changed the subject, asked about the grandchildren. Clara let it go, but her gaze stayed with me longer than I expected. The real turning point, the one I couldn't avoid, came in 2018. Vera started to feel a different kind of fatigue, a persistent nausea that she tried to hide for weeks. When she finally admitted she needed to see a doctor, her voice was already slightly different, more cautious. Tests revealed a heart problem, a severe arrhythmia that required constant monitoring and some delicate procedures. She was hospitalized for 12 days at Brighton General Hospital. During those 12 days, I sat beside her bed every day, from morning until the nurses asked me to go rest. For the first time in decades, I was just looking at Vera without anything to do, no accounts to calculate, no problems to solve with my hands, just her and me. And a silence that, this time, weighed differently. One afternoon, when she was feeling better, she took my hand. That's all. She said nothing. I looked at that hand in mine, those hands that had done embroidery, cooked, had cradled my children, had planted orchids in the backyard of the new apartment, and I felt a wave of good and bad things at the same time. A mix of gratitude and regret that squeezed my chest in a way I had never felt before. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say that she was everything. I wanted to say that I had been a fool for 50 years for thinking that silence was synonymous with solidity. But I swallowed. Again. An old habit hard to break. It was Mark who shook me, unintentionally. He came to the hospital one night and found us sitting in silence, each looking in a different direction. Later in the hallway, he pulled me by the arm and said, "Dad, talk to her, anything. She needs to hear your voice the way she deserves to hear it." I looked at my son, an engineer in his 40s, and realized he was saying what Clara had tried to tell me years ago, what Vera herself had tried to tell me at that table in 2003, what I myself had known since 1963, and had never had the courage to turn into sound. I went back to the room. Vera was awake, looking out the window at the orange sky of late afternoon over Brighton. I pulled the chair very close to the bed. I took her hand with both of mine, as if it were something precious that I had dropped so many times that now I needed to hold it with great care. And I said, "Vera, you are the heart of this house. You always have been. And I was a fool for not having told you that every morning of our lives." She looked at me for a long time without blinking. Then she said, in that voice that was hers, "I knew, Ronald. I just needed to hear it once in a while." I cried. For the first time since my father's funeral in 1978, I truly cried. Right there in that hospital room, with the smell of alcohol and the slow beeping monitor. She let me cry, said nothing, and just stroked my back the way she always did with the children when they had nightmares. And I understood in that moment that she had waited for this gesture, not because she needed pretty words, but because she needed to know that I was still capable of truly feeling. Vera got better. She recovered, with limitations, but she recovered. We still had 5 years together after that hospitalization. 5 years different from all the others. I learned to go down to the kitchen when she hummed. I learned to sit beside her on the balcony without needing any reason. I learned to say thank you for dinner, not out of politeness, but for the truth behind it. I learned late, but I learned. Vera left us peacefully At the beginning of 2023, in winter, while she slept. She didn't suffer. Her face was serene, just as it always had been. Today, at 82, I sit in this wicker chair every morning and look at this house that she truly helped build. Not with cement and brick, but with presence, with patience, with a silent faithfulness that I took too long to recognize. The last 5 years we spent together were the gift I almost let slip away out of pride. The other day my grandson Daniel, who is 31 and works too much for a technology company in London, called me to say he was fine. I asked him if he had told his girlfriend Rachel that too. There was a pause on the phone. Not much, Grandpa. I told him not to let that debt accumulate. I told him that emotional debt doesn't come with installments, and when it's due, it's all at once, with interest that hurts more than money. If there's one thing I've learned in this whole life, is that action offers security, but words offer soul. That paying the bills doesn't replace being present. That buying a gift isn't equivalent to explaining why the person deserves to be gifted. Love isn't a monument you erect once and abandon. It's a living organism that needs daily attention, small gestures, a look that says, I see you, I choose you, you matter. Look around your life now. When was the last time you looked into the eyes of the person you love and said something not tied to a task, commitment, or obligation? If you disappeared tomorrow, would your memory be associated with your salary or your presence? Do you withhold affection for fear of seeming weak? Do you know the secret dream of this person who shares your table? If tonight were the last opportunity, what phrase would you say? And why haven't you said it yet? I learned almost too late, but I learned. And this learning is worth nothing if kept only for myself.